Want to stay up to date with everything that's happening on the show? Or do you have a story that you'd like to submit for one of our Listener Stories episodes? You can get in touch with the show via the website at www.hauntedukpodcast.com, on Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, on X at hauntedukpod, or you can email us at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and TikTok. And if you want to support the show, you can do it via either Patreon or Ko-fi. Both platforms have exactly the same content, but work in slightly different ways. One of the advantages of Patreon is its sleek user interface. But if you want to avoid those pesky additional charges that Apple, Google, and Patreon apply to your subscription, then why not give Ko-fi a try? Simply open a browser window and type ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast, and you'll soon find us. Whichever platform you choose, we're sure you'll enjoy the bonus content. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the episode. For most people, the thought of an island holiday conjures up images of sun, sandy beaches, relaxation. Perhaps the sights and sounds of tropical birds, maybe a dash of adventure, or a guided excursion through a foreign landscape. Countless visitors flock to islands on holiday every year, and most of them have a wonderful time, returning to their daily lives feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. But for some who perhaps chose a sunny island with a darker side, a holiday can take an unexpected turn, leaving some of them to return home traumatized, and in some cases, accompanied by an entity. This is Haunted UK Abroad, and in this episode we're exploring mysterious and haunted islands around the world. Let's begin with a popular destination for people who live in the UK, the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands are not only bathed in sun but also in folklore and legends, and it doesn't take much research to unveil stories and accounts of supernatural experiences and paranormal encounters in the region. A commonly told tale hailing from Tenerife, one of the area's most popular islands, is that of Catalina Lecaro. Born in the 1500s to a noble family, Catalina lived a privileged life in most ways. She had a stately home, food, staff, a life most people from that time could only dream of. But there was one thing missing, something incredibly important to her. This was a time of strategically arranged marriages, and Catalina had fallen in love. With no way out of marrying a man she did not want to spend her life with, the night before her wedding, Catalina put her wedding dress on and finest jewelry and made her way to a construction pit in close proximity to her family's mansion and threw herself in, falling to her death. Catalina's family, being devout Catholics, were faced with a problem. Because she had taken her own life, she could not be buried on consecrated ground. To avoid scandal, they called off the wedding, claiming Catalina had come down with a severe illness. Eventually, they recovered her body from the pit and placed it in a hidden chamber within the walls of the mansion. Centuries later, the mansion was converted into a museum. Shortly after the museum's grand opening, visitors and staff began to report encounters with the ghost of a young woman in a wedding gown floating down the hallways. It is believed Catalina is trapped within the walls of her former home, unable to move on until her body is discovered and given a proper burial. Also on Tenerife is the former leper colony, now a ghost town, called Sanatoria de Abona. After the end of the Civil War, residents of the island of Tenerife found themselves with the need to segregate 200 of their fellow inhabitants who had been diagnosed with leprosy. They agreed upon the solution, which was to design a town that would be used as a quarantine station. The design featured approximately 40 buildings, including a church, hospital, crematorium, and housing. But a cure for the disease was discovered before the project was completed, so construction was stopped and the partially built town abandoned. The small settlement was briefly used as a military camp, but has largely sat abandoned after plans to turn it into a tourist resort fell through. The skeleton of the town that never was remains today, derelict and mostly covered in graffiti, attracting a multitude of curious visitors each year. It is said the location exudes an eerie stillness, as though it is still waiting for the people who never came. No island legend would be complete without a cryptid, and the Canary Islands have one for the ages. It stems from the time of the Guanches, a prehistoric people who inhabited the Canary Islands. They believed in mythological creatures known as the Tibicena, which were thought to be demons or genies housed in the bodies of wild dogs with red eyes and long black fur. The Tibicena was said to live in deep caves in the island's mountainous areas and would come out to roam at night. The Guanches believed they were guardians of the underworld, and rare sightings of them were considered a bad omen. Moving on, the disappearing island of San Borondon had been a topic of both legend and mystery for centuries, when in 1957 a photographer managed to get a snapshot of a somewhat craggy mountain rising out of the Atlantic Ocean in two peaks. The island has been deeply entwined in Canarian culture since word of it came about in the 16th century. Over time, it's become the symbol of an elusive utopia and serving as a reminder that someday the Canary Islands might also disappear, being that they are volcanic in nature. The legend begins in the 6th century, when an Irish saint and his crew set sail in search of utopia. Relatively early in their voyage, they landed on an island with the intent of setting up for Mass. But soon after setting foot on the island, they felt the land move beneath their feet. They quickly returned to their boats and watched in shock as the island retreated into the ocean, leading them to realize they had been standing on the back of a giant whale. They carried on with their expedition, but it soon became apparent that they were trapped in a loop of enchanted islands that repeated on an annual basis. The Whale Island became part of the loop, appearing once a year around Easter, when they would be able to come ashore to celebrate Mass. This loop carried on for 7 years. Nearly 1,000 years after this strange expedition, Columbus reached the shores of America, causing a renewed interest in exploring the Atlantic Ocean. The story of the Irish saint and his crew was still circulating, though with the understanding that it had been lavishly embellished in the centuries that had elapsed. In the late 15th century, the Spanish colonized the Canary Islands, which are conveniently located at the start of the transatlantic trade winds. Today, it is widely accepted among the scientific community that the unique atmosphere at this location causes the optical illusion of an island that isn't actually there, though scientists remain uncertain of the exact mechanics behind this. Science also can't seem to explain how the photographer from the 1950s managed to photograph an island that, supposedly, doesn't exist. The optical illusion is so realistic, however, that several 16th century maps include the island generally located to the west of the westernmost island in the Canaries. Over the centuries, there were several expeditions to find and reach the disappearing island, and several accounts of boats sailing out whilst the island was visible, only to have it vanish before they reached its shores. This reminded sailors of the legend of the saint and the whale, hence the name San Borondon, the Spanish equivalent of the Irish saint's name, Saint Brendan. As hardships such as famine, drought and plagues washed over the region, finding the island of San Borondon became a quest to find a utopia promised land where the soil was always fertile, water always flowed, and food was abundant. As times grew increasingly desperate, legends about the island grew darker in nature. One of the new superstitions was that if San Borondon were to surface, it would be at the expense of one of the other inhabited islands that would then sink. There are some people who continue to believe the island once existed, but at some point in history sunk beneath the surface of the water. This resonates with many who live in the region and have an understanding that their topology is shaken by volcanic activity periodically. As the phrase has been coined in the Canaries, solid land isn't always solid. Though modern scientific explanations have eased the minds of most Canarians with regards to the superstitions and curses associated with San Borondon, the mysterious vanishing island still remains firmly ingrained in their culture in the form of songs, artwork, poems, children's books, and cultural relics. Near Venice, Italy, is an island that is said to have seen more suffering than any other place in the world. The island is called Poveglia, though it is commonly referred to as Plague Island. Located in a lagoon between the cities of Venice and Lido, Poveglia is the subject of much superstition, with most Venetians refusing to set foot on it, claiming it is awash in restless souls. Historically, the island is mentioned by name as far back as the year 421 AD. Over the course of several centuries, it became temporarily inhabited by refugees, then sat abandoned for 150 years until the plague struck. When the plague hit Venice, people were rightfully panicked. Being an island as well, Venice was particularly vulnerable to epidemics. It was decided that those who were afflicted by the plague and the bodies of its victims would be shipped to the island of Poveglia for quarantine. Deep pits were dug and filled with the bodies of the dead, which were set on fire or covered with dirt. The saying is that the landmass of Poveglia is made up of 50% dirt and 50% human remains. In a sense, the dead were the lucky ones. It's terrifying to think what the sick people being transported to the island may have seen in their final days and hours. During the more recent pandemic of 2020, we saw a resurgence of plague doctor masks with their bird-like beaks hanging off the front. What a sight to behold when very ill, near death, and alone in a foreign land. We shudder to think. A century after these events, the pits were rediscovered and reopened, which led to a disturbing discovery. Before delving into what was found, let's look at the science behind what happens to bodies when thrown into a mass grave. Decomposition gases build up and can cause a body to bloat and internal organs to rupture. The blood from these organs can sometimes find its way up through the mouth. When the pits were actively in use, they would be reopened every time a new victim died, so their body could be disposed of. Upon discovering one or several corpses with blood dripping from their mouths, people grew to believe the island was overtaken with vampires. At that time, it was said that the best way to slay a vampire was to place a stone in its mouth while it was sleeping, so the creature would starve to death. A century later, researchers found multiple skulls with pieces of rock clenched between their teeth. It's terribly unsettling to think of the poor people who were sent into the pits to place rocks in the mouths, of decomposing bodies. 1922 saw new inhabitants arrive on the island. This time, rather than plague victims, they were psychiatric patients. A facility was erected and a man put at the helm of it who, as it would be later discovered, was perhaps more afflicted by madness than the people in his care. He would perform experiments on his patients and cruel procedures such as lobotomies, leading to the death of more patients than would be considered customary in his line of work. Legend has it the doctor himself eventually descended so deeply into madness that he threw himself from the clock tower. Some believe it was the ghosts of his victims who taunted him to his death. The decaying remains of the psychiatric hospital are still on the island, which has been abandoned, at least by living people, since the late 1960s. Even today, the local population and especially fishermen give the island a wide berth. It is said that on a clear blue day, the skulls and bones of some 160,000 plague victims brought to the island are still visible under the surface of the water. If a skull or bone is accidentally caught by a fishing net, the entire catch is thrown back into the water, for fear the fish will be cursed. It's understandable, given its long, dark history, that people would not only avoid, but downright fear Pavelia Island. There have been a multitude of reports of different paranormal phenomena, starting with fishermen who claim they can hear screams and moans coming from the island. Others say they have heard the bell in the bell tower ringing, even though the bell itself was removed decades ago. There are also several alleged ghosts roaming the island, including the spirit of Little Maria, who for the last 400 years has been scaling the beach while crying in the most heartbreaking way. It is believed she was one of the unfortunate plague victims who died at far too young an age. The plague era isn't the only one to have left lingering spirits behind. There is also the ghost of Pietro, who after having his legs amputated would race his wheelchair down the hospital corridors. Witnesses claim they can hear the sound of a wheelchair racing through the hospital. There is another spirit who is said to grin and laugh at people in a disturbing way, and the apparition of a young woman with a ghastly expression on her face. Silhouettes are seen in the windows of the hospital, and people report feeling as though they are being followed when visiting the island, which is said to emanate a deep, heavy feeling of sorrow. In the US state of South Carolina, one can find the aptly named Cemetery Island, locally referred to as Ghost Island. The island is all that remains of the Harrisburg Plantation, which had existed from the late 1700s to the mid-1900s, when a dam project flooded the area, creating an island out of the hilltop plantation cemetery. The original plantation owner, John Harris, used money he earned as a soldier in the Revolutionary War to purchase the land located at the confluence of two rivers. He became a notable figure locally and served as a judge, doctor, and high sheriff until his death in 1845. He and eventually his wife Mary were both buried on the hill, which was the highest point on the property. Over time, their children and their descendants would also be laid to rest in the family plot, and there they rested until their eternal sleep was rudely disrupted. In the 1950s, the nearby river's rising floodwater became a threat to some of the low-lying towns on its banks. Plans for a dam project were drawn up, and construction began in 1954. Surviving descendants of the Harris family were contacted and given an opportunity to relocate the family graves. These were at risk of being washed away by flood tide, but it is said they declined to take action. The dam project was completed in 1962, leaving the man-made Lake Hartwell and a sunny island with 59 buried bodies of deceased Harris family members in its wake. It is said the graves are still in their original positions. The island, only reachable by kayak or boat, is now public land and sees many visitors who come for birdwatching, fishing and camping. For the more adventurous, it is said that in some places where dams were built, at the cost of largely inhabited areas, one can dive and see remnants of the towns and structures that were flooded and now find themselves below the waterline. According to local legend, the dead Harris family members have a habit of making appearances on what is left of their property. In a surprising twist, an additional unrelated ghost also allegedly haunts the island. The spirit of a woman by the name of Cyril Broyne, a granddaughter of one of the accused witches in the Salem witch trials, is said to inhabit the island, though no one seems quite sure how or why her ghost would have ended up there. North of the American border, near Halifax in the Canadian province of Nova Scotia, lies Sable Island. This 25-mile-long, low-lying island is made entirely out of sand. Whilst it is famous for the 400-odd wild horses that have roamed free along its shores for centuries, as well as the harbour and grey seals who use it as a breeding ground, the island has also gained notoriety for a much darker, more tragic reason. Being that it is essentially a massive sandbar in the ocean, the island has amassed a long history of causing shipwrecks, earning itself the nickname Graveyard of the Atlantic. Indeed, the island has been deemed responsible for the destruction of over 350 ships that have run aground on its sandy shores. Some believe the wild horse population may in part stem from one or more of these shipwrecks from centuries ago. Many of the island's ghost stories are also closely associated with the shipwrecks. The most famous ghost story hailing from the area is the apparition of the Nine-Fingered Lady, who is thought to have been one of the island's countless shipwreck victims, herself dating from the 1800s when a ship called Francis foundered off the island. The only survivor of that wreck was a woman who somehow managed to cling to a latch cover and make it to shore. Unfortunately for her, a previous shipwreck victim had taken up residence on the island, and he was not a nice man. He made his living scavenging for valuable pieces of debris from the shipwrecks. That day, he allegedly waded into the ocean until he reached the woman, still desperately clinging to the latch, and dragged her by her hair until they reached the shore. Noticing a valuable emerald ring on her finger, he beat her to death so that he could sell it. The thing he didn't foresee was that the woman's fingers were waterlogged and swollen, and the ring would not come off. So he proceeded to cut off her finger and take the ring. Witnesses claim to see the woman's ghost standing on the beach, waving a bloody hand at passers-by. Another famous Sable Island ghost story involves a short-lived French penal colony located on the island in the late 1500s. In the early 1600s, an expected annual shipment of wine and clothing that was supposed to be delivered to the penal colony failed to arrive. Without badly needed supplies, the colony quickly unraveled into complete anarchy. Another ship eventually arrived the following year, only to find that the uprising had instigated a mutiny, which saw the colony's 2 leaders and several of their supporters killed. This had led to increased chaos and violence, in which several colonists killed their fellow islanders. It is said that by the time the ship finally arrived, there were only 11 surviving colonists, as those who hadn't been killed in the uprisings likely died of illness or starvation. The ship captain agreed to take the men on board, leaving behind only a friar who willingly stayed on the island because he felt the return journey would be too much for his failing health. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing the figure of a cowled, brown-robed priest walking over the sand dunes whilst looking out to sea, perhaps watching for shipwreck survivors who may be in need of assistance. Today, the island is protected by the Canadian government, who keep a close watch on its comings and goings. Preserving the natural habitat of the flora and fauna gracing the island is of the utmost importance, and no one is allowed to visit without government permission, which is generally only granted to scientists and researchers by the Canadian military. Across the world in the Bay of Bengal sits North Sentinel Island. Unlike most of the islands covered in this episode, Sentinel Island is not haunted by the ghosts of those long departed, but rather by a group of people who are very much alive. The indigenous people of the island, known as the Sentinelese, are one of the last remaining tribes on the planet who refuse any and all contact with the outside world. They are outright hostile to any outsiders who attempt to set foot on the shores of the island, which has all but endured its reputation for being a place of legend and mystery. Historians believe the original islanders likely migrated from Africa. What is known of their culture points to a hunter-gatherer way of life and seafood as a primary staple of their diet. Farming appears to be non-existent, and the population appears to live in small huts and use rudimentary boats, both of which have been observed during aerial surveys. The Indian government estimated in 2018 that the population of the island hovered around 40, though other sources claim close to 100 tribespeople inhabit the island. There are very few historical records about the island, as encounters and photographs have been few and far between. From what little information is available, it appears the island's inhabitants are short, muscular, and generally remain naked other than belts around their waists. There also appears to be a larger number of men than women. It is thought that the Sentinelese have their own language, which differs from the Andamanese languages spoken by dwellers of nearby islands. Some members of those tribes who claim to have met the Sentinelese have said they could not understand them. As the old saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. This is the risk taken by anyone who tries to venture onto the island to interact with its inhabitants, no matter how good their intentions may be. In 1867, survivors of a nearby shipwreck were rescued in the nick of time as the Sentinelese were attempting to kill them before they reached the shores of the island. In 1880, a British naval officer successfully made contact with various island populations, including the Sentinelese, and brought a few members of the tribe to the capital, Port Blair. Of the 6 Sentinelese brought on the trip, 2 died from disease. The remaining tribe members returned to the safety of their island, with their distrust of outsiders heavily reinforced. In the mid-1950s, the Indian government put a set of strict laws in place in order to protect the population of Sentinel Island. They enforced a nearly 9.5-kilometer perimeter around the island which no outsider is allowed to cross, with a warning that anybody who chooses to ignore the law and cross the boundary would be at risk of being killed. They specified that no Sentinelese would be prosecuted for killing trespassers, and no bodies would be retrieved from the island. The purpose of these laws was to protect the tribe from disease and potential extinction. As recently as 1981, yet another shipwreck occurred near the island, with a panicked captain radioing for help and describing a scene of a group of wild men brandishing homemade weapons. Despite these frightening encounters, a group of anthropologists in the 1990s successfully met and interacted with the Sentinelese. The team had brought coconuts as a gesture of peace and were able to study the group as they met on the shore. They noted the tribespeople appeared to be very much intrigued by metal objects, as if they had never seen them before. This was the last time the Sentinelese allowed any such visitors to set foot on their land. After an earthquake and subsequent tsunami in 2004, a helicopter flew over the island to ensure the Sentinelese weren't in need of assistance. The pilots were shocked to see the tribespeople completely unharmed, as they shot arrows and threw rocks at the helicopter. Scientists and researchers still can't explain how the island's population was able to avoid the devastating consequences of such a major natural disaster. Approximately 2 years after the earthquake, the Sentinelese killed 2 fishermen who were found to be fishing illegally off the island shores. Then, in 2018, they killed a Christian missionary from America who tried to visit the island to spread the word of his beliefs. His body, as well as that of the 2 fishermen, have never been retrieved from the island. A witness who transported the missionary to the island stated his body had been buried on the beach. As one of the very few remaining uncontacted tribes in the world, it is infinitely tempting to reach out, to have a strong desire to communicate, discover, study their way of life. It's fascinating to think that these tribes have survived without outside help or influence for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years, away from prying eyes and interference. But despite the protections put in place, researchers predict the tribe's future may be under threat, and that they may simply die out naturally. In the meantime, they should be left to live peacefully on their island, leaving the rest of us to wonder what it must be like to live in a completely different and perhaps much simpler world. One of the most wondrous islands in the world is a land of mystique and legends which intertwine with its unique history, culture, flora and fauna. It's a place of magic and mystery called Socotra in Yemen. At the heart of Socotra's local culture is the dragon's blood tree, which, according to legend, was created when the blood of a slain dragon spilled into the soil. It is said the red resin that gives the tree its notoriety is the blood of the dragon. The tree and its unique umbrella-like shape has been a symbol of the island, but it is only one part of the unique flora and fauna found there. Dubbed one of the most otherworldly and alien places on Earth, Socotra Island has been separated from mainland Africa for millions of years and features a unique ecosystem with over 700 rare species of flora and fauna that exist nowhere else in the world. This singular biodiversity earned the island the honor of being named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Another legend associated with the island involves a type of entity called jinns, which are mischievous and unpredictable supernatural spirits. Jinns are shapeshifters who can take on the form of various animals and even humans. Stories are so deeply ingrained in the culture that visitors to the island are cautioned to be respectful of the jinn and their inhabitants. There are several archaeological sites with ancient ruins on the island that researchers believe are part of a lost civilization. The common theory is that the civilization was washed away during a great flood, and the ruins are all that remain. Socotra is also home to several burial sites and ancient tombs where famous and notorious figures from the island's long history are buried. Ancient legends associated with the island include the story of a giant bird of prey, capable of carrying off elephants, as well as tales of dragons and sea monsters. A land of mystical creatures, lost civilizations, and a collection of plant and animal life alien to the rest of the world. Socotra is the definition of a magical, mysterious island. The border between the United States and Canada is the longest unsecured border in the world. Part of that border cuts lengthwise through the middle of the St. Lawrence River, where an area called the Thousand Islands boasts close to 2,000 islands of various sizes and attributes, and a long history that involves pirates, Prohibition-era rum runners, luxury accommodations for the wealthy, tourist attractions, and of course, more than its fair share of ghost stories. From pirates who would sacrifice a member of their crew to stay behind and guard buried treasure, to victims of smuggler wars, jilted lovers and long-departed homeowners not ready to abandon the secret passageways hidden in their homes, The Thousand Islands area offers endless possibilities for those fascinated by the paranormal to have a memorable, if not terrifying, experience from both sides of the border. The small town of Alexandria Bay, New York, is populated with souvenir shops and small diners, offering little to no hint as to its status as a millionaire's haven. Yet off its shores is an island which is home to a small castle, a testament to the extravagance and wealth that was so common in the area at the turn of the century. For an approximately 30-year span in the late 1800s and early 1900s, many figures from America's high society, such as wealthy industrialists and politicians, flocked to the area to holiday. The wealthiest amongst them would purchase entire islands for themselves on which they would build stately homes, hotels, and even castles, which still exist today. Singer Castle on Dark Island is one such structure, with medieval-style turrets, stone walls, and full sets of armor on display. Riddled with secret tunnels and passageways, the castle was originally conceived as a hunting retreat for the president of the Singer Sewing Machine Company, and some claim he fully intended for his ghost to return there someday after his death. Not one to let himself be outdone, the president of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel commissioned his own castle on Hart Island. Bolt Castle was said to be a 120-room summer home intended as a Valentine's Day gift for his wife. But only a few weeks before the holiday, she tragically passed away from heart failure. Construction on the castle was halted indefinitely and never resumed. The partially built Bolt Castle sat unfinished on the aptly named Hart Island for 75 years, until the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority stepped in and began renovations on the structure to the tune of $38 million. Parts of the castle are now complete, including the dining room, library, and ballroom, which hosts over 150 weddings annually. Some say the broken-hearted ghost of Mr. Bolt likes to attend the receptions, asking the love of others to compensate for his loving marriage, which was tragically cut short. In the 1920s, the United States was under prohibition, which gave rise to illegal smuggling of liquor across the Canadian border. Rum runners, as they were called, would hide their stash on the islands to avoid getting caught by law enforcement, returning later to collect their goods. It is necessary to explain at this point that the border between the United States and Canada is not straight. This is especially true in this specific area where it zigzags between islands and around the bends of waterways. Given this, the location of specific islands was often brought into question, especially when it came to liquor and the stringent laws in place in the United States at the time. One story hailing from this area concerns Zavacon Island, whose owner built a 32-foot bridge to a smaller nearby island he also owned. He claimed that the primary island was located in Canada and the smaller one in the US, and that his man-made bridge was the shortest international bridge in the world. This claim has been disputed for decades and is typically pegged as a tourism ploy, with most sources claiming both islands are located in Canada. To this day, smuggler stashes are still found on occasion, with some estimating the number of hiding spots may have reached the tens of thousands at the peak of Prohibition. One of the first castles built in the area was Calumet Castle, commissioned by a tobacco and hotel tycoon in the late 1800s. The castle owner's story is filled with tragedy. His first hotel in the area, the New Hotel Frontenac, was burned to the ground after a visiting musician's room caught fire from a cigarette. A strange twist of fate, given the hotel's owner made his fortune in the tobacco industry. Tragedy continued when his first wife passed away at a very young age, and things worsened when his second wife died in Calumet Castle during his birthday celebration in 1907. The castle, which had hosted countless lavish parties, was shuttered permanently after this final tragedy. 4 decades later, the abandoned castle burned down, leaving only a water tower, which was later converted into a lighthouse. Some attribute the final fire to a paranormal event, with the castle owner finally finding a way to achieve freedom from the place where his heart was ultimately broken beyond repair. Deer Island, nestled on the St. Lawrence River, is bathed in a deep sense of mystery. The 40-acre privately owned island has been linked to a secret society called Skull and Bones, as well as multiple conspiracy theories, an Ivy League university, and powerful political figures. Legend has it, the island has been the location of strange rituals, of initiation and bizarre ceremonies. Limited access only enhances the air of mystery that hovers over Deer Island, which is said to house multiple underground bunkers. Theories about the activities taking place on the island include everything from harmless fraternity meetings to elite gatherings with far darker and more sinister intentions. Members of Skull and Bones are sworn to secrecy, so little is known about who is involved and what types of rituals are practiced on the island, providing much fodder for the conspiracy-minded and lovers of mystery. Though not the most famous of the Thousand Islands and with limited documented history, Isle of Pines is still at the center of some interesting stories. Late musician Meat Loaf filmed an episode of a paranormal television show here in 2009, which revealed some fascinating aspects of the island's history over the past 80 years. At the island's origins, the United States established a lighthouse station and assigned a man named Bill Johnston to manage it. Shortly after he was put in charge of the lighthouse, he encountered a family of runaway slaves escaping from the southern United States. They begged him to take them across the river to Canada, but due to his own past legal troubles, Johnston felt crossing the border with them would be too risky and left them on the island. There is no historical record of their fate, though some claim to see the family's ghosts still wandering the island, searching for a way to get across to Canada. Some years later, the island was purchased by a wealthy man to build his summer home, which had more of the appearance of a palace. The island and property were then sold to a family who kept it for generations. During their tenure, members of the family took up residence in a 3-story boathouse that was added to the original buildings on the property. At this time, the primary house was used as a monastery for priests, but they were made to leave it when it was discovered they had destroyed some artwork that depicted scenes that went against their beliefs. Once the family moved back into the house, adults reported the children playing with invisible people, who were supposedly dressed in priests' attire. There were also later reports of dark shadow creatures appearing in and around the boathouse. On the Canadian side of the Thousand Islands area is Hill Island, which has a fascinating and rather curious history. In 1921, after changing hands multiple times, the island and the stately home built on it was sold to the heir of an oil fortune named Wallace Bird, who also owned an estate on Long Island in New York. Bird lived a lavish, indulgent life before his untimely death in a plane crash in 1941. Wallace Bird's widow, Marjorie Winifred, who went by Winnie, was only 44 years old at the time of his death. By the mid-1940s, she abandoned both her inherited properties on Long Island and Hill Island and moved to Europe for several years. There she met a Romanian prince, to whom she paid a stipend to accompany her on social outings. As time went on, Winnie's extravagant lifestyle got out of hand. It is said that in her final weeks and days she smoked 80 cigarettes a day, stopped feeding her tropical fish and birds who died of starvation, and refused to sign checks, letting bills go unpaid. Her partner, the Romanian prince, arranged for a physician who was rumored to have lost his medical license to treat her with barbiturates. The dose prescribed and administered to her was massive, with rumors stating that she ingested over 7,000 pills in a 9-month span. The prince cut off her supply suddenly, and Winnie died shortly after. The prince and the physician were accused of murder, their motive being laying claim to her jewels and money. They were found guilty and sentenced to several years in prison. The estate on Hill Island had declined since it sat uninhabited when Winnie moved to Europe years prior, and after her death it was once again sold. The caretaker's cottage was renovated, but the mansion was beyond repair and eventually torn down. The remaining parts of the property saw a fitting end, with their last use being the location for a Canadian horror film. Parks Canada purchased the property and incorporated it into the St. Lawrence Islands National Park. A stone and cedar water tower and the caretaker's cottage are all that is left of what was once a grand estate. Well, that and Winnie's restless ghost, who still roams the island, confused about what happened to her and screaming for her former lavish home. Though technically not an island, the final location on our list is a fascinating one. Nestled very close to the absolute center of the Pacific Ocean is the Palmyra Atoll, a remote, uninhabited tropical paradise with a dark, sordid past. An atoll is an accumulation of coral growth around the rim of a long-extinguished volcano, and this one is viewed as a dream location for scientists and conservationists due to its dense rainforest and coral reef filled with tropical marine life. However, Palmyra remains infamous for its history of shipwrecks, disappearances, and a gruesome murder that made headlines worldwide. The first known mystery associated with the island is a rather disturbing one. A ship called the Angel was shipwrecked on the island in 1870. Surviving members of the crew made it to shore, only for their brutally murdered bodies to be later found carelessly disposed of around the island when another ship anchored to investigate. Their deaths remain a mystery to this day, though some say it has ties to a ship that had previously also been wrecked on the island. That ship was allegedly carrying Inca treasures that had been stolen from Peru, and the crew spent a year surviving on the island before burying the treasure and attempting to escape. None of the men survived, with half of them simply vanishing on their raft, and the other half perishing before rescue or dying shortly thereafter. This led to rumors of the island being cursed by the Inca as punishment for their stolen treasure. In the 1940s, the United States Navy occupied the island. Subsequent reports of strange and unexplained phenomena soon followed. One tells of a patrol plane that dropped out of the sky whilst flying over the island, leaving no trace of debris or crew members in the surrounding ocean. Another instance saw a plane suddenly veer off course shortly after takeoff and immediately vanish from radar, never to be seen again. There are also stories of conflict among the Navy officers which led to suicide and even murder. The most famous story hailing from the Palmyra Atoll, however, is that of a sailing couple named Malcolm and Eleanor Graham, who in the mid-1970s anchored off the island as part of their plans to travel around the world on their boat, the Seawind. Their plan was to remain on the island for a few years before continuing on their adventures. Little did they know, the island would be their last stop. After not hearing from them for several months, friends of the couple grew concerned at their lack of communication and reported them missing. Investigators visited the island but found it completely deserted, with no trace of the couple or their boat. Several months later, the Seawind sailed into Honolulu, Hawaii, with a couple named Dwayne Walker and Stephanie Stearns at the helm. The pair were arrested on site and charged with theft. It would take another 6 years for the horrifying truth about what happened to Malcolm and Eleanor Graham to come out. A couple from South Africa were visiting the Palmyra Atoll when they came across an abandoned building hidden in the rainforest. Inside, they made the disturbing find of newspaper clippings about the missing couple, leaving them both confused and unnerved. A few days later, they found a large metal container bound in wire washed up on the beach. Inside the container, they found a skeleton, which was later confirmed to belong to Eleanor Graham, who had been severely beaten to death, then her body dismembered, burned, and disposed of. Though Malcolm's body has never been found, it is presumed he was killed and disposed of in a similar way. The couple who had been arrested with their boat were accused of murder. Dwayne Walker was found guilty, but his girlfriend was acquitted due to insufficient evidence against her. In subsequent testimony, both from the trial and by visitors to the island in general, it has been said repeatedly that the island is covered in a hostile, threatening veil. Some even describe it as being removed from time. Other adjectives associated with the island are spooky, foreboding, and sinister. Whether it is the ghosts of the murdered sailor couple, ancient Inca spirits angered by their stolen treasure, or perhaps an irregularity of nature at that location not yet fully understood by science, there is no doubt that the Palmyra Atoll is a place of negative energy that has seen more than its fair share of mystery and tragedy. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of this episode. We've traveled the world visiting islands with reputations ranging from eerie to downright terrifying. And we've heard about buried pirate treasures, haunted castles, violent tribespeople, and shipwrecks. A far cry from the sun-filled, relaxing holidays that most people associate with an island destination. What is it about islands that makes them so fascinating? Is it the fact that they are segregated from larger masses of land? That they so often change hands or uses over their lifetimes? Perhaps it's their one-of-a-kind ecosystems, or their oceanic locations affected by tides, winds, and the Earth's magnetic poles, or the fact that, in some cases, they could disappear entirely with very little notice. Whatever the case, the next time you book an island holiday, be sure not to venture too far off the path into the lush surrounding forest. Look over your shoulder while exploring that abandoned building just up the beach. And don't be too quick to investigate the rustling shrubs near your campsite, because the next person to be haunted abroad could be you.